Alright, so I'm going to show this first, and then I'm going to get into the other part of this video. I did make the little gearbox cover. Came out pretty much perfect. A little bit of an overhang this way. Doesn't seat perfectly up against the transmission gearbox thing, but it covers the gear set on the motor. Keep all the sand and debris out. I had to notch it right there. You can see my solder joint, but I notched it right there to go around the cross member. Worked great. So okay, now back to the other part of the video, or to the other part of the video I should say. Comments I'm reading and trying to help somebody out. I'm gonna get my tow truck down here and show this. I've showed this before. This is the OH32 PO2 Tundra rear axle. Now this one didn't come with the Tundra. I bought everything for this one separate. You can see the gap there. This never did seat, and when I went to put the screw in it, it stripped out the hole, so I never messed with it. It sets up high enough that I'm not worried about it getting too much sand in it, and it's not that difficult to take it apart because it sets up so high. But that's one issue I've had with this truck, with this axle. When it came to the exact same axle off of that Tundra, which is now in here, this one was perfect. This one came with the kit, and it was already built when I bought it, because I bought that truck used on eBay. But this one came out, you know, it's fine. So I don't know if it's just the wrong bearing in it or what. You can see on the outside, right here, the outside bearing, I have a longer shaft in here. This is a brass bushing over it, and then I have the bearing that goes on the outside. It has the flange on it. It's flange bearing. Yeah. So this is all set up a little different than in any of the other ones, really. I mean, none of my stuff's stock. Everybody knows that. You just kind of got to do what you got to do to get them done. You know, very fine tuning on your suspension links will set your axle spacing left and right and get them centered. And it takes a while sometimes, depending on the truck. This one, if you look, this one does offset just a little, because this like a, you know, this is so, she's falling out. The little driver chick's falling out. I don't even remember what I was saying now. And get her back in there. If you get your adjustments right, measurements, I use a caliper, just a generic caliper from AliExpress, to make sure they're all the exact same length, and I always stand them up on one end. Let me get this going on here. I'll stand them up on one end like this, side by side, on top of my steel block. You got to have something perfectly flat to make sure you stand them, two of them side by side, make sure they're the exact same length. That is a tremendous help on making sure your axle is centered. If it's one side's forward and the other side's back some, all it takes is adjusting the links, and it's tedious. It really is. If you get a set of calipers and make sure they're all the exact same length, when you take one off to adjust it, count how many half turns. And when I say half turns, let me move my tow truck here. when I say half turns, I'm gonna set my block up here and make this, do my little phone stand. When I say a half turn, on the links, get my X-Acto blade. On the links, you'll notice this side has a little ring on it. I'm off camera again. One side has a ring, and the opening is. I'm gonna get this to focus. Give me a minute. Cameras are so irritating. Okay, it's not gonna adjust right because of this stuff back here. Messy hobby desk, as always. Okay, well, so I guess we're just gonna fight with a blurry camera. On one side, you'll notice it's kind of dull and matte finish, textured. The hole is actually smaller on that side than on the back side. The back side is designed where you push the ball in. There's a ring around it. Okay, so when I say half turn, you're gonna look at the back side where the ball goes through, hold the other end, turn it one time. Now you've got the dull textured side facing this side. So that's what I say when I say I always adjust them half turns. I always adjust them half turns, and I'll remember, 1, 2, 3, and that gives me my accurate adjustments. So this is a set of PO2 links that I've taken off of that truck because I made these other extra long aluminum links out of a pair of broken tweezers for this. And I'm going to use, I think I'm going to have to use, I was actually talking to my son about the F-150 Raptor this morning. To raise it up with the extra long shocks, I think I'm going to have to use the Tundra links. Yeah. And the other thing in the comments that I'm going to help with here, on my Green Monster Jeep here, Mini Monster, whatever you want to call it. These aftermarket wheels for WL Toys, WL Racing, they rubbed, or there was a gap, and they kind of moved around too much. Okay, so I took some brass washers and filed them really thin. Literally just filed them little by little until they fit in here to eliminate that slop. If your wheels are touching the hub of your axle, it doesn't matter if it's the aluminum ones, it doesn't matter if it's the plastic ones, it doesn't matter what wheels, if they are touching that hub, it's going to cause it to be sluggish and bind. It's not going to want to roll as good. Let's see, what else? I can show those. I've got them on all 4 of these wheels because these are, like I said, these are WL Toys wheels. Very expensive in my opinion, but they didn't fit it right. The only WL Toys wheels that I've had that fit right are these wheels, and these are the stadium truck ones that come with way smaller tires. These are the GK24 39mm tires, but these, I had no problems fitting these. These wheels actually fit the Orlandoo axle perfectly, in my opinion. There's no binding, no nothing. And this is my carbon fiber chassis that I haven't ever finished. I mean, the chassis is done, it's all set up. I've got my Losi shocks on it right now. These are Losi Micro T shocks with Orlandoo Hunter end caps, top and bottom. So the center tube, the spring, and the shaft are the only parts of the Losi Micro T, and these are the extra tall ones. So I mean, if you got an old Losi Micro T, or you can get the old shocks cheap, it'll save you money on buying these. If you don't, you might as well just go ahead and get the Orlandoo ones if you want the extra tall ones. These are the extra tall ones for the XO2 that I plan on using on this truck. That's why I have 2 sets of them. So I'm planning on using them on this truck with the MO1, MO2 aluminum tires and the extra big tires, or wheels and the extra big tires. The big mini Z wheels that I bought, I haven't used them yet. They were originally going to be on this, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to work them on that truck, so yeah. I did modify these wheels slightly to fit to work with the Orlandoo aluminum axles. There's a little thing, a little lip, or I don't know what to call it really, inside there. I had to file it out. You can actually see where I filed them inside the hole, and they fit perfect now, but I still had to put shims. I still had to make shims for the rear axle. The front axle fit perfect. Another thing is the lock nuts. If you're using regular lock nuts like these, get it to focus, like those, you should be good to go on holding your wheels on, your nuts on. If you're using these kind of nuts, wheel nuts, you need to put a rubber O-ring, a tiny rubber O-ring behind it before you put it on the wheel. I actually have some in this. I know my desk is always a mess, but it's done this way because when I sit at this desk and I get into this stuff, I get into it. These are little rubber O-rings that I put on the axle, and then I put the wheel on it after. So you put these on, then you put the wheel on, then you put these on, then you put the nut on, the wheel nut. And it doesn't matter if it's the regular wheel nut, or, and when I say regular wheel nut, I'm talking about the one that comes with the Jeep and the truck and everything, just these, the little hex nuts. If you use those, or you use the, I'm going to call them the fancy ones, these, which I bought 2 sets of, you put the rubber O-ring in between those and the wheel, otherwise you will lose your nuts. I know that sounds funny, but the wheel nuts will back off on 2 wheels usually, and you'll have to dig around and find them. My other set is all of the fancy ones are on my little blue Jeep, Blurple. I call it Blurple because it's kind of a bluish purple color. But yeah, I put the rubber O-rings on all of them with those nuts. The lock nuts are the only ones I don't have them on. If you have spacing issues behind the wheel, you can use those rubber O-rings on the axle to push the wheel out a little bit and give it a little, it'll still have a little flex to it. Let's see here. You can also, depending on the wheel, if it's aluminum, you can file it carefully. If it's plastic, you can trim it with the edge of a knife or something. If it's the resin ones, like from Tiny 4x4, so pretty, love the designs. But if you have problems in here, you'll have to be very careful because this resin cracks easy. But you can sand around it as long as you don't mess this little lip right here. I'm not even looking at the camera, sorry. This little lip around here, as long as you don't mess that up and you can scrape or sand around this outside area, you can make space in there to make them not bind and rub. As far as shock links, there's several different options that I've came up with, different springs and stuff. Like I said, these are Losi Micro T shocks on this chassis, and they plenty of distance to move in the rear. This chassis will not use these when it's done. I plan on using the normal double rate springs that came out. I guess they were like the second ones that came out. And the way I do them is I remove, for this truck, I'm removing the top spring and stretching the spring out a little bit. And I mean, there's just so many different things. My little blue Jeep, I'll show that again. These are stock shocks, but if you look at the lower parts, I've used the regular ball end, tie rod end things on my shocks with a little aluminum thing that I made out of, believe it or not, the inside of lighters. The inside of disposable lighters. I'll show this, and I've had people comment some bad stuff on Facebook to me before and kind of ticked me off because I'm not that person. But when I pick up lighters, when I see a lighter at a gas station laying on the ground or something, I pick it up. I always pick them up. Doesn't matter where I'm at. If I see a dead lighter that somebody threw down, I pick it up. I bring it home because those little aluminum pieces that I just showed you are literally from the inside of lighters. You get these little pieces out of them and you can trim them down and make little things for them. Little spacers. I'm trying to find, this is it. This piece right here, if you can find a couple of lighters that use this piece, I cut it right here and just use this piece. You got to drill out the hole a little bit so it goes over the shock shaft, but when you do, you've got a spacer that this, or a retainer, the tie rod end part goes here, the lower shock mount, I guess you'd call it, goes in here, and it sits up against this. The spring sits here, this lip holds the spring. So I mean, these little things, they work. And my exhaust tips on the green Jeep, they are lighter pieces, literally lighter pieces. I built model cars most of my childhood and off and on as an adult, and I always looked for velocity stacks, exhaust tips, and experimented with buying aluminum tubing and trying to make exhaust tips and stuff like that, and it always messed them up. So looked for any option I could for different pieces, and that's something I came up with years ago. So I don't know if I'm going to help you with this video, but I hope so. It's all kind of just a tedious back and forth of adjustments to get your things all set up right. I'm still not solid on this Raptor with the aluminum chassis. If you look here, you can see my front axle sits back too far and my pinion is angled down. So this is not going to work. I have to change out my links because that pinion angle where the drive shaft hooks up right there has to be tilted up slightly, not much, just slightly. It can be, you know, pretty much straight, but it's got to be tilted up more. If it's tilted down at all or just perfectly straight out and you've got it lifted up too high, it's not going to work right. I've had a lot of binding issues with this Jeep because it's short wheelbase. Well, it's not anymore, but when I raised it up, you can see my pinion angles. Let me set it down so it sits right. My pinion angles, I had to do a lot of adjusting back and forth to get those pinion angles right there. That drive shaft pinion angle has to be slightly angled up when you lift the suspension. So, and these are the double shocks that are, you know, stretch springs with the top spring removed. So it's still got the full length shock, but it just doesn't have the double spring in it. I just didn't like it the way it worked. And this the front springs also on this one, I had to make little brass bushings for inside here. I don't know if they'll show up on camera right now. There are brass bushings right here to raise these front ones up just a little bit. And I very carefully drilled that brass tubing out to make those. There's just so much different options you've got with these little things. They're supposed to be, you know, I get it, where they're supposed to be more scale accurate than I'm not trying to cut down to SCX24, but they're supposed to be more scale accurate than something, you know, like that. But you can just do whatever. You know, if you can find a old low C micro T body and figure out how to get that on an Orlandoo chassis, you know, go for it. If you can find a die-cast Ford Bronco body, this is 1/34 scale, so it's actually smaller than the Jeeps. You can find something like this and can figure out how to convert it. I've got, you know, resin bodies that I've been wanting to build, and this is going to be a two-wheel drive, and I'm planning on using Orlandoo axle. Where's that other one I just bought and took apart right away? It's right here. This I bought at the same time with the Bronco. It's a school bus, but it's a Jeep, and it has the sliding doors like a old postal Jeep. And I mean, it's die cast, but the scale of this, it said it was 1/26 scale. I have to show this. It's supposed to be 1/26 scale. It is nearly identical size to the 1/35 scale Orlandoo. I mean, it is such a close match on the size of this body. It will work. And if you compare that 1/35 scale to my 1/32 scale, this is a model kit, snap together model kit that I converted. If you compare it to this 1/26 scale, it's still so close that it's ridiculous. So I mean, your options are forever ending. It just goes on and on and on. And I always see stuff that I think about doing, and you know, the never-ending options. You know, low C micro T transmission, handmade chassis. I'm still not done with it. It's just you know, do whatever you feel like you can. Your shock links, I think the one without the spring is taller than this, but they make one that's a little bit taller than this without the outer springs. That's about the tallest one I know of. I think they're taller than the low C micro T conversion that I did. My Duroc has just the double shocks with the top springs removed, and that's something that you know, if you leave the springs stock height, don't stretch them. Let me get this to focus, because this is kind of important too. When it sits down, you can see that spring moving. When it sits down, it's actually just, you know, kind of like the normal shocks, but when you drive it over rocks and stuff, it'll give you a little bit of an axle drop. So, you know, it'll drop down a little further. And this one's full brass. There's so much brass inside this, it's heavy, but it's only wheels and suspension. But yeah, it's fun little hobby. Fun hobby, and once you get into it and you buy more than one, oh, it's game on. If you get 3 or 4 of them, it just turns into something else. That's when things like this end up happening. You end up with, especially if you're doing things where you end up with extra parts. If you get extra parts, you're going to want to do something with them, and that's literally how I ended up building this. I kept thinking about things, and then I saw this body on eBay, and it was cheap. The quality wasn't amazing. You can see I've had to do a lot of work to the inside to smooth it out a little. Yeah, I mean, it was just a good candidate for. It's heavy. It's kind of heavy for resin, but anyway. You'll just get into it. You just get into it for real. I'm still planning on building so many. It's just time and money. I always say that about all kinds of stuff. It's time and money. I have other plans in my future that are time and money. Lots of them. So, still not sure how I'm going to do the suspension on that truck. Not sure how I'm going to finish the suspension on this truck. I'm not sure how I'm going to get the body mounted on that one. This body mount came out amazing. I'm extremely pleased with this. The magnet set up there just works great. But anyway, I'm just gonna ramble if I just keep doing this. So, well, me and my kids just had watermelon ices, and it's a 100-degree day outside. So I'm gonna cut this video off, and you can comment and let me know any more details, and I will do my best to help you. So thank you much. Thanks for watching, commenting, subscribing, all of it. Have a good day.